Nuclear war was never a single button pressed by a madman. It was a socket wrench slipping in an Arkansas silo, a technician loading the wrong tape at NORAD, a Soviet officer staring at a screen that screamed "attack" while his gut said otherwise. The Cold War's deadliest moments were not grand strategies, but mundane errors, miscommunications, and near misses that repeatedly pushed civilization within one switch, one call, one human decision of annihilation. How many times did the world survive simply because someone, against all protocol, hesitated? Today, 6 nuclear close calls that almost erased history. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and subscribe so you make it all the way to the #1 spot. Now, let's start the countdown. 1966. Palomares B-52 crash. On January 17, 1966, a U.S. B-52G bomber on a Cold War airborne alert mission collided with a KC-135 tanker during mid-air refueling at 31,000 feet over the Mediterranean Sea near Palomares, Spain. The bomber carried 4 B-28FY thermonuclear bombs, each with a 1.1 megaton yield. The collision snapped the B-52's left wing, causing an explosion. 3 crew on the bomber and all 4 on the tanker died. 4 bomber crew ejected. 3 bombs fell on land, conventional explosives, and 2 detonated on impact, scattering plutonium over 2 square kilometers. The 4th bomb parachuted into the sea. A local fisherman, Francisco Simo Orts, saw it enter the water. The U.S. Navy mounted an 80-day search using Bayesian theory and the submersible Alvin, recovering the bomb intact from 2,550 feet. Cleanup removed 1,750 tons of contaminated soil shipped to the U.S. Residual contamination persists. With a 2015 agreement for further remediation, the accident ended nuclear-armed overflights of Spain and contributed to terminating Operation Chrome Dome. 1979. NORAD false alarm incident. On the morning of November 9, 1979, the watch officers inside the Hardin Command Center of the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, faced what their screens told them was the end of the world. The computers at Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado, linked directly to early warning satellites and ground radar, began a cascading alert. A massive Soviet submarine-launched ballistic missile attack was inbound. Then, the displays updated. It was not a single launch. It was a full-scale preemptive strike. Hundreds of Soviet ICBMs were on the way. The threat level jumped to the highest possible category. National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski received a phone call at 3 in the morning. He was told 2,200 Soviet missiles were heading toward the United States. He had minutes, maybe less, to advise President Jimmy Carter on a retaliatory strike. The logic of mutually assured destruction is a brutal equation of time. A land-based ICBM from the Soviet Union takes roughly 30 minutes to reach its target. The decision to launch a counterstrike must happen in a window of single-digit minutes before the president is vaporized or communication lines are cut. The machinery of nuclear war relies on a hierarchy of verification to prevent a single sensor glitch from triggering Armageddon. The raw data from a satellite detecting a rocket plume must be cross-checked with ground radar stations, tracking the heat signatures through the atmosphere. That morning, the cross-check failed. The ground radars did not see the missiles because the missiles did not exist. A technician at the command post had accidentally loaded a training tape into the live warning system's main computer. The simulation depicted a perfectly coordinated, worst-case scenario Soviet strike. The system, designed to be paranoid, treated the digital phantoms as physical truth. Fighter interceptors scrambled. Bomber crews ran to their aircraft. The entire nuclear triad began its deadly ballet. The error was identified in under 10 minutes. Brzezinski was seconds away from waking the president when a second call confirmed it was a false alarm. The cause was a 50-cent computer chip failure in a data multiplexer that allowed the simulation data to bleed into the operational network. A software patch was installed within 48 hours. The technician was reassigned. The world never officially knew how close it came until years later. 1980, Damascus Titan II explosion, September 18, 1980, 6:30 in the evening. Launch Complex 374-7, a Titan II missile silo buried in the farmland of Van Buren County, Arkansas. A propellant transfer system team is performing routine maintenance. Airman David P. Powell descends into the silo carrying a heavy ratchet wrench. The socket, an 8-pound piece of steel, slips off the handle. It falls 80 feet, ricochets off a thrust mount, and punches a hole in the skin of the first stage fuel tank. A cloud of Erosene 50 begins filling the silo. Erosene 50 is hypergolic with the missile's oxidizer, dinitrogen tetroxide. This means the two chemicals ignite instantly and violently on contact, no spark required. The oxidizer tank sits directly above the punctured fuel tank, below the 9-megaton W-53 thermonuclear warhead. The physics here is simple. Erosene 50 is a volatile toxic liquid. Exposed to air, it vaporizes, creating a dense, explosive aerosol. The puncture depressurizes the fuel tank. The 8-story, 150-ton missile is now a fragile column of metal supported by a draining, crumpling bladder. If the tank collapses, the missile falls. The oxidizer tank ruptures. Hypergolic ignition becomes a certainty. For nearly 6 hours, response teams wrestle with the leaking, structurally unstable Titan II. The Launch Control Center is evacuated. Lieutenant General Lloyd R. Leavitt, Jr. commands the effort to save the complex. 2 airmen, Devlin and Huckel, are sent into the toxic cloud to access a vapor detection panel. They cut through fences, pry open doors, and descend into the silo. Their breathing air runs low. They retreat. 2 more airmen, Livingston and Kennedy, take over. Their vapor detectors scream a warning. The atmosphere is explosive. They are ordered to evacuate. Then, a new order. Re-enter the silo, turn on an exhaust fan. Senior Airman David Lee Livingston goes back in. At around 3 in the morning on September 19th, the fan motor arcs. The hypergolic cloud detonates. The initial blast catapults the 743-ton silo door into the air. The missile's second stage, with the warhead still attached, is ejected from the silo. It explodes above ground. The W-53 warhead lands 100 feet from the entry gate. Its safety mechanisms function. No nuclear detonation, no radioactive release. Livingston died of his injuries. 21 others were wounded. The entire launch complex was destroyed, never repaired, and eventually buried under gravel and soil. The 9-megaton warhead was retrieved and returned to the Pantex plant. A single-drop tool had triggered a sequence that bypassed every engineered safeguard, proving that in a system of perfect technical lethality, the final failsafe is always a fallible human being. Able Archer 83. It began on November 7, 1983, a 5-day NATO command post exercise, coordinated from SHAPE headquarters in Casteau, Belgium. The scenario was standard for the annual Able Archer series, simulate a period of escalating conflict culminating in a coordinated nuclear release. But the 1983 version introduced new elements, a unique format of coded communication, radio silences, the simulated participation of heads of government. These procedural changes, designed to increase training realism, were the mechanism of the crisis. They interacted with a pre-existing Soviet intelligence operation called RYAN, a massive, paranoid hunt for signs of an imminent Western first strike. The KGB and GRU had spent 2 years priming their agents to look for precisely these indicators. The new communications format, the sudden silences, the movement of personnel to bunkers, these were not seen as a drill. The Soviet interpretation, driven by a visceral fear rooted in the surprise of 1941, was that the exercise was a ruse of war, a cover for a genuine attack. The logic was simple. If you planned to launch a nuclear strike, you would disguise the final preparations as an exercise. Therefore, Able Archer 83 was not a simulation. It was the final stage of preparation. In response, the Soviet Fourth Air Army began loading nuclear warheads onto combat planes. Air units in East Germany and Poland went on high alert. The world moved closer to a nuclear exchange based on a misread signal. The escalation stopped not because of a diplomatic hotline, but because a single U.S. Air Force Lieutenant General, Leonard H. Perutz, saw the Soviet activity and advised against a proportional NATO response. He correctly assessed it as nervous posturing, not an imminent attack. The exercise ended on November 11th. The Soviet forces stood down. The declassified 1990 President's Intelligence Advisory Board report later called it a moment as dangerous as the Cuban Missile Crisis. 1961, Goldsboro, B-52 crash. On the night of January 24, 1961, a B-52G Strato Fortress of the Strategic Air Command entered a catastrophic spin over North Carolina. The aircraft, part of the Airborne Alert Mission Cover All, had just aborted a mid-air refueling due to a massive fuel leak in the right wing. The crew lost 37,000 pounds of fuel in 3 minutes. At 9,000 feet, the pilot ordered the crew to abandon the disintegrating bomber. 5 men survived, 3 did not, as the airframe broke apart. 2 Mark 39 Mod 2 thermonuclear bombs, each with a predicted yield of 3.8 megatons, separated from the wreckage and fell toward the farmland below. Each weapon was a multi-stage physics package enclosed in a gravity bomb casing weighing close to 10,000 pounds. The primary stage was a boosted fission device with a sealed pit of highly enriched uranium designed to compress a thermonuclear secondary stage. The arming sequence for this weapon was a carefully choreographed electrical cascade. Upon release from the bomb bay, retracting arming rods would trigger a single-pulse BISH generator. This generator would send an initiation signal to a low-voltage thermal battery pack and start a countdown timer. As the bomb fell, a barometric differential pressure switch would close, sending battery current through an arm/safe switch to a high-voltage safing system, which would then connect a high-voltage thermal battery to the X unit, the device that fires the detonators. The arm/safe switch was the final low-voltage electromechanical gate, a solenoid-operated switch kept in the safe position until a deliberate 28-volt electrical signal ordered it to arm. When EOD teams and engineers from Sandia National Laboratories recovered the first bomb, they found its arming sequence had nearly completed. The BISH generator had fired, the timer had run, the barometric switch had closed. The arm/safe switch was the only component that had not moved. A single low-voltage solenoid was all that physically separated the primary from a high-voltage firing pulse. The weapon had armed itself fully by accident, a cascade initiated by the violent breakup of the aircraft, mimicking a deliberate drop. The second bomb's secondary stage buried itself deep in a muddy field and was never recovered, despite extensive excavation. The engineers judged it credible to imagine conditions under which a 4-megaton detonation could have occurred over the United States. 1983, Soviet nuclear false alarm. The date is September 26, 1983. It is just past midnight at Serpukhov 15, a secret bunker south of Moscow. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov is a few hours into his shift, watching the screens of the Oko early warning satellite system. His job is singular: observe the computers and, if they flash a missile warning, immediately report it up the chain of command. The doctrine is launch on warning. A retaliatory strike would be ordered before the first incoming warhead detonates. The logic of mutually assured destruction demands this speed. There is no time for debate. Suddenly, a siren blares. The computer screen lights up with a single word: launch. The system reports one Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missile has left its silo in the United States, heading for the Soviet Union. Then a second launch appears. Then a third, a fourth, a fifth. The screen flashes the highest level of alarm. The computer's assessment of the threat is maximum reliability. The protocol is clear. Petrov must pick up the phone. He does not. He stares at the screen. His reasoning is a cold, logical calculation rooted in the psychology of deterrence. A real American first strike would not be 5 missiles. It would be a massive, overwhelming salvo of hundreds, designed to decapitate Soviet command and control and destroy retaliatory capability in one blinding flash. 5 missiles is an illogical start to a nuclear war. It is a mistake. Furthermore, the Oko system is new, rushed into service, and, in his professional opinion, not yet wholly trustworthy. He grabs a handset connected to ground-based radar operators. He asks if they see anything. They do not. The ground radar is incapable of seeing over the horizon, but the silence is another data point. He tells his superiors the alarm is a system malfunction. He waits. No missiles arrive. The silence confirms his bet. Investigation later finds a rare alignment of sunlight on high-altitude clouds reflected into the satellite's sensors, tricked the system into seeing a ghost attack. Petrov's decision broke the automated chain of escalation. He was neither rewarded nor promoted. The incident embarrassed the scientists and military brass responsible for the flawed system. He was quietly reassigned, later took early retirement, and suffered a nervous breakdown. The man who prevented a nuclear war was written up for failing to properly fill out his logbook. Civilization survived not by design, but by the restraint of a handful of individuals who chose doubt over doctrine. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Drop your idea for the next episode in the comments.